Welcome to the Persuasive Mindset, your podcast guide to mastering the art of persuasion by exploring its role across diverse fields through in-depth conversations with experts. I am your host, Dr. Serena Mate-de-Landran. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Professor Dr. Michael Hengartner, who is the president of the ETH Board and also the chairman of the executive committee of the ETH Domain. In a nutshell, the ETH Domain may be understood as Switzerland's federal university system, which consists of a network of higher education and research institutions, which include ETH Zurich, EPFL in Lausanne, and 4 Swiss national research institutes. Dr. Hengartner was born in Switzerland and then grew up in Canada. He initially trained as a biochemist before completing a PhD at MIT in the United States, where a single conversation about programmed cell death changed the course of his scientific career. That willingness to trust a gut feeling over a carefully laid plan became one of the most defining threads of his remarkable journey. By listening to this conversation, you will gain insights into what makes a great educator, the difference between how scientists and politicians make decisions, the ETH Domain strategic priorities for the future, Dr. Hengartner's definition of persuasion and explanation of how it impacts his field, and the concept of Ikigai and the ancient Stoic philosophy that helped him stay calm and purposeful in turbulent times. And as always, the conversation will close with career advice, which is meant to inspire students, early career professionals, or anyone interested in the field of science. Now, let's dive into our conversation. Enjoy! Thank you very much for joining the podcast. I'm very happy that you took the time from your busy schedule to join us. And as we start our conversation, I'd like to ask you, could you please describe your current role and position as the president of the ETH Board?
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Serena. The ETH Domain is Switzerland's small federal university system, if you want. Consists of the 2 technical universities of this country, ETH in Zurich and EPFL in Lausanne. What is quite special about this university system is that it also includes 4 national laboratories. These are often in other countries separate from the university system, which generates silos or difficulties in cooperating. In our case, they're part of a family. So the Porsche Institute, PSI, EMPA, EAVAC, WSL are all also part of this ETH domain. The ETH board is the board of trustees, if you want, the board of directors of this group. We're basically at the intersection between academia, politics, government. My boss is Mr. Parmelin, the Minister of Economics, and society at large, industry, if you want. So it's a very unique, but also very interesting position to be in.
And if you were to describe 1 or 2 days in your typical life, what would they look like?
They're all different. Most of my time is spent talking to people and enabling other people to talk to each other. So formally, we're responsible for making sure that political strategic decisions from government get implemented, and to explain to government also the needs and the requirements that our universities have to be able to serve society. We need to assure that the institutions coordinate well. My motto is how to best serve Switzerland. So how can we best together invest the many francs we get from the taxpayers like you for the benefit of our society? And then also hear from stakeholders, be it politicians, be it industry leaders, be it students, what needs, what wishes, what ideas they have. There are many, many intelligent people in this domain. We have over 1,000 professors. They all have fantastic ideas. And so we want to make sure that we enable the best ones of these and allow them to bloom and to productively generate solutions for society.
Thank you very much for this explanation. And in terms of professors, you also teach and used to teach. Could you please describe what was your field? What is currently your field?
I learned biochemistry as an undergrad, then became a geneticist. Would call myself a developmental cancer biologist, perhaps at some point. So I was teaching molecular biology, molecular genetics in my days. The first semester, molecular genetics into a course, DNA makes RNA make protein, the central dogma. We had a huge class at the University of Zurich, over 600 students. It's probably the best time to teach students. They're new at the university and have big eyes, and you can still impress them. And then had often a master class level on post-transcriptional gene regulation. So how can you control what genes are active, but not at the transcription level, making RNA, but at the later steps. That was a field that still today is very active. We still learn a lot. So there was a lot of movement, a lot of exciting stuff that was also fairly closely related to what I was doing in my own lab. We were doing C. elegans research, so a small invertebrate model organisms, a little bit similar to Drosophila. And that kept me pretty busy in my research days, I must say, and my teaching days.
And I'm really curious, how did you initially get so interested in teaching?
Must be intrinsic motivation. I taught already as an undergrad on the side. I was TA in some lab classes, I guess, just to earn money. But I really enjoyed explaining to people how things work. And apparently they enjoyed listening to me because I got positive feedback. Then as a graduate student at MIT, I also then TA'd classes, so classroom classes. That also was different, but it was interesting. And in fact, when I got my first job at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, one of the negatives about that job offer was that I wouldn't be a professor. I wouldn't have teaching duties. And most of my colleagues thought, well, that's the fantastic part about this job. I thought, well, it's actually sad. So I volunteered to teach a little bit at Stony Brook, where we were close by, and we could get also PhD students from there. And I started volunteering for teaching at the graduate level at various places. The Rockefeller University, there was a fantastic course I did with colleagues for many years in Portugal. And it just, the energy you get by teaching, by seeing clever young people gain knowledge, gain insight, ask really clever questions. I don't know, I get energy out of it myself. So you give a lot. I remember I was exhausted after my lectures, but also you get so much positive energy. So I would say I like it because it's a win-win for me and for the students.
I love teaching, so it's so nice to actually hear you share your experience about teaching. I also want to congratulate you because you've received several awards regarding your teaching experience. And I also noticed online that, for example, one of the awards that you got were the Credit Suisse Award for Best Teaching here in Switzerland. And based on your experiences, now you've taught at many different institutions. What do you think is the key to being a good educator?
As an educator, you're basically partially a coach, partially a tutor, a mentor. The learning happens in the head of the student, not in your head, right? So stop trying to maximize content, catalyze, they say light the fire, and I'm absolutely true. I'm convinced that's true. You need to get them interested in learning the stuff. And then it will happen by themselves. Figure out where do they have a problem, try to understand, so perhaps more asking questions than just making statements. Seeing where's your limit, where do you reach the limit of your understanding, is there any particular challenge you have, and then work with the students together on these challenges. With technology today, the content providing can be done with technology often much better than some random guy at the blackboard or on the PowerPoint in the front of the room. What we are very good at is based on our experience, and because we're humans, we like to interact with people, our ability to sense where we can add to either generate more internal energy or address a particular barrier that might be there where people need help to overcome this barrier.
So if I understand correctly, you're advocating for the fact that we should minimize how much information we pass along during the class time and maximize making sure that the student fully understands the content?
In theory, yeah. On paper, I'm a huge fan of flipped classrooms. The big challenge, my experience, is making sure that the flip part has happened. So if the student then comes into the classroom and has not read the material, there's not much you can discuss. And so that's why many of my colleagues fall back to presenting the material, because then at least, well, I'm sure they saw it. But again, I think that if you have the luxury of being able to have smaller class sizes or make sure that they do get access to the material, again, there's fantastic tools nowadays, be it videos, podcasts, like what you do, movies, AI supported learning. A lot of this content provision is probably better done by others, right? I mean, so in my class, I chose a textbook. I didn't write that textbook myself. Somebody else was better at writing textbooks than I was. And so I picked that textbook. You could pretend you're the best at explaining the textbook. Perhaps you're not even the best at doing that. Maybe there's some videos that really explain the stuff well. And then again, what can you add? And that is then the personal interaction with the students. And the main challenge is simply when you have 600 kids in the classroom, how do you take care of 600 at the same time? It becomes a huge challenge. And so there, clickers, small group discussions, where we had these buzz groups where the idea was to turn around and have a discussion peer-to-peer, three to four groups, and check with your colleague next door whether you have understood it, whether she understood it. And so this activating peer learning, activating interaction is actually where I see our added value. The rest we can do, but again, there's other ways to also do it that are just as valuable probably.
And a lot of the listeners are, for example, teaching assistants because they're studying PhD, for example. What's your advice to teaching assistants so that they maximize how their interaction goes with the students?
So they're privileged because they already have smaller groups. They actually have a chance to get to a first-name basis with all of them, presumably, fairly rapidly. Building a relationship with the students helps a lot. It reduces their fear. It increases their trust to actually look silly and ask a question. That's good. So get this trust relationship built. The first thing I said whenever I entered a new class was, "Hi, I'm Michael. Please just call me Michael. We're here to learn together." The other thing I recommend to everybody is go and learn how to teach. I mean, there are some didactic things one can learn. You can learn it on your own. You can learn by trial and error. Why would you, right? I mean, there's what better ways to do it. Most of my really good teaching, I shamelessly copied from other people I saw teaching. I thought, he's doing that really well. I should do that too. And it largely works. So yes, don't be shy to steal from the best. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And the final thing, perhaps, I'm a big fan of using humor. It opens up the atmosphere. It gets back energy into the room. It shows, again, that one can have fun and learn at the same time.
I love it. Thank you so much. And maybe who was one of your role models when it came to teaching that you looked up to?
I did an executive MBA when I decided to become Dean of the Faculty of Science at University of Zurich because I realized, I'm going to be in charge of 100 million a year. You better know what you do. And one of the teachers, it was an early morning class, and I always came early, I was a Streber already, already then. That prof came in class and put on some rock and roll music at 7:15 or something like that in the mornings. And I just thought, everybody's awake, everybody's in a good mood. And so I started doing that. I was teaching at 8 a.m. Monday morning. And so I showed up at 7:30, started installing my stuff, put on my own playlist, every week a new playlist. And the students were awake. Every now and then, one of the students would actually come down and say, "What was that song? Can you give me the name of that song of that musician?" So, right, but completely non-related to the content, but again, it made them more ready to be there and be attentive.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing this. And actually, this kind of pivots into what you were saying, that you ended up choosing also to do an executive MBA. And when I read that online, my initial question was like, but you already had a PhD and so many other diplomas. Why exactly did you choose later in life to do the IMD, I think, executive master's, right?
You should never think that you know it all. You should always learn. And again, as I said, you can learn it by trial and error. Might be expensive in terms of time. In that case, it could have been expensive in terms of money. So I simply decided I owe it to the faculty to be as good a dean as I can. And I thought managing a large group of people, probably there's some do's and don'ts that you could learn from the experts. And that's what these management courses are about. I wasn't sure what I was getting into. At the end, it was really useful. I would do it again right away. Not everything was directly applicable. Running a business is not the same as running a faculty of a large university. Most of it was translatable. Perhaps the hardest part was supply chain management. I was wondering, what's my supplier? Or the student from the high school, from the gymnasium. But most of it was translatable, and some stuff, a leadership, a strategy, that's directly applicable. I learned how business people think, how they learn, how they work. That was helpful for my future interactions with people from the economic sector. An MBA gives you some evidence that you're a reasonable guy. So as an academician, talking to industry leaders, they sometimes think you're this weirdo. They show that you're a serious weirdo. So it helped you a little bit in those discussions. And finally, I became really good at time management. My dear wife was pregnant with number 4. And while I was doing this, I was running a lab, I was already vice dean at this course, and so I became really good at making sure to be efficient in my time management, and that was very helpful for future activities also.
It's amazing. And then sticking with your educational route in order to reach the level you're at, what was another pivotal educational experience, you think?
I think you should always have plans, but then you should be willing to throw away these plans if something interesting comes your way. Part of my career was things I planned on doing, and part of it was somebody knocking on my door and saying, "Hey, Michael, how about this?" My move to Europe came about. I was at Cold Spring Harbor doing my research, happily there. It's a fantastic place. It's a monster of science, Again, you can really focus on science, science, science. And so sometimes some guy comes around. He said he's a professor at the University of Zurich. They have a newly endowed chair. They know I'm Swiss. I was born in Switzerland. That's true. I left the country when I was 6 months old, but I had the passport. And they said, "Well, we want you back." And so I never thought of applying to a job in Switzerland. But, I went, I looked at the job offer. It was a very good job offer. I thought, yeah, why not? So being open to new opportunities, I think, is very important. And then being ready to take a jump into uncomfortable terrain. So I think that's the biggest recommendation I have is you will only grow if you go out of your comfort zone. And so you can plan that or you can stumble into it. And some people are forced into it. That's less comfortable. But take every opportunity you can because that's where you learn the most. And given our life expectancy, especially people your age, young people, learn early, learn often. It's going to make you fantastic collaborators in the future.
And speaking of career trajectory, what was a pivotal career choice, you think, for you early on?
Early on. So I went to MIT because my favorite teacher, I grew up in Quebec. I went to the University of Laval. It's the French university in Quebec City. My favorite teacher was a teacher of genetics, and he had done his PhD at MIT. And so I thought, well, he had done his PhD at MIT. Maybe I should do my PhD at MIT. So I applied there. I actually go and interview ahead of time with David Baltimore, a Nobel Prize winner, discoverer of the reverse transcriptase. And he was working on transcription factors. And I thought, NF-kappa B, one of the transcription factors he was working on, fantastic. I'm going to work with him. And so I went to MIT because I wanted to work with David Baltimore. But the way MIT worked at the time is you couldn't directly join a lab. You had to first take a year of classes. And then you had to interview with different research groups to then finally decide after something like 8 months which lab you would join. Now, I told everybody, well, I came here to work with David Baltimore and NF-kappa B, and everybody nodded. But then I felt that I should do my due diligence, so I interviewed with a few other people, and completely by chance, I interviewed with a guy called Bob Horvitz, who was working on elegans. And initially I thought, why am I even talking to this guy? And then the last 5 minutes of that 1 hour interview, he told me about a process I had never heard about called programmed cell death, which just whacked me. And it was a process where cells commit suicide. And me as a biochemist, I just did not understand how can organs be so wasteful? You know how much ATP you generated just to make that cell? Now you're just going to throw it away? It just bugged me. And I said, I got to figure out why organisms do that. And so within 2 weeks, I completely changed my mind and decided, told everybody I'm going to work with Bob. Had to call up this Nobel Prize winner and say, look, I'm very sorry, Professor Baltimore, but I changed my mind. I'm going to work on worms. And my colleague said, you could work with Mr. Nobel Prize winner. Why on worms? Do you want to work with worms? So I think that was a pivotal moment. I was throwing away my career, but in the process, I built my career.
It's so interesting when people just listen to themselves, because as you said, sometimes you do have to throw away the plans you make and just go with the intuition. Or I don't know, how would you describe it? What is this when we just change our minds abruptly?
Gut feeling. So it's something within you saying, go for it. There was no rational reason to do that. It was intuition in the best sense, an urge. And I felt this is where your passion is going to be. You might know the concept of Ikigai, find the sweet spot in your life.
Yes, love it, yeah.
Right, something people pay you for that you're good at and that you like doing. I knew already I would like doing that and I'd be good at it. It wasn't clear somebody would pay me for it. At least for my graduate courses, they would pay me for it. So for the next 5 years, I was okay. I had found my Ikigai. So it was not a hard decision to make. It needed some explaining to do, but internally, I was absolutely convinced it was the right thing.
Wow, I love it. It's so inspiring. What's your advice to others trying to listen to their Ikigai?
Yeah, find it, find what you're good at and what you're passionate about. We often say we scientists, we get paid to do our hobbies. In a certain sense, that's true. And so it's an absolute privilege to be able to have an exciting job where you get, and the force part of Ikigai is something that gives a sense, a purpose, right? And so being a teacher gives you a sense of purpose. So it all just adds up. I keep saying I have the best job in town. I truly believe it.
And speaking of teaching, you said you initially started teaching in the US. And so technically you taught, if I understand correctly, both in the US and also in Switzerland. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
correct.
Are there any similarities or very big differences, you think, in these two countries in terms of academic system and teaching?
Not in theory. In practice, the people you teach to tend to be different depending on the cultural backgrounds they have. So in the US, there tended to be more people who have gone through the American education system. Here in Switzerland, there are more people who tend to have come through the Swiss education system. But again, they were all international universities I was at. So you get this broad mix of people. I'll give you a good example of. So my first statement, hi, I'm Michael. And this was a master's class. There was this student from India. And he goes, yes, professor. I said, no, 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 please call me Michael. Yes, professor. No, no, you don't get me. Please call me Michael. And so he really, with the full force of his will, what he was able to get to is, yes, Professor Michael. So it was not bad will from this person. It's just this person had grown up in a completely different cultural background. And I was trying to force my cultural background onto his cultural background. And at the end, we had to find each other at a place where we both felt as comfortable as we could. But that was an important lesson to me too. It's like, at the end, we don't need to be in an environment where I'm comfortable. We need to be in an environment where the student is comfortable. But again, I want to get him to their limit, right? I don't want to keep them comfortable. I want to start them comfortable and then push them to the limit so that they can grow.
I had the same issue because coming from Romania, we are very polite towards people who have higher education degrees. So it was extremely difficult to go first name basis with anybody who had a PhD, for example. So I can definitely relate to that. Okay, and speaking of the difference in countries, so then you switched working here in Switzerland, and now is it correct that you're currently based in Zurich?
I have my garden and my bed here in Zurich. That's where my private home is. I have offices in Zurich, in Bern. I have some workspace in Lausanne. I travel quite a bit. When people ask me, where are you the most? I tend to answer in the train.
And also a lot of conferences because I've met you at a conference recently.
Yes. So again, my job is meeting people, right? My job is talking to people. And so I tend to go where the people are because that's more convenient for them. And often I want something from them. So I go and visit, or I have information to share. And then I go where the people are willing to listen. So yes, as I said, every day is different, but I meet new people every day.
And I'm really curious about, just to unpack a little bit more ETH Domain. There are some listeners who maybe are not very familiar with it. What are the current priorities? Because I was reading online, there are some strategic priorities that you're currently working on.
Right. So we try to prioritize things that, on the one hand, are important for society, are the current challenges or future challenges. And these are the classical things you think about, like climate change, energy transition, digitalization, including AI, aging societies, and so forth. That's the first dimension. And at the same time, these must be challenges that our society faces where we, as a domain, can contribute better than others, either on our own or in cooperation with others. So there are some challenges where we simply are not the right tool. Switzerland lacks nurses. We don't have any curricula in nursing. We can't really help there. It stays a challenge, but it's a challenge others need to address. But we lack electrical engineer and civil engineers. That's something where we can make a contribution, where we can see how can we serve society. Aging society, they are together with university hospitals. We need to do it. We can't do it on our own, but we have, with the medical engineers, we have something to contribute. So that's it. Now, if you look then at the portfolio of challenges where we can contribute, you get the classical. So we have human health, we have energy, we have climate biodiversity, we have digitalization, we have what we call dialogue with society. We have all the new key technologies that are coming our way, from advanced materials to quantum to space. And then security and sovereignty. So Switzerland in the new geopolitics needs to be and make sure that we have also the tools required to be able to continue to make decisions on our own. And so this is in part cybersecurity, for example, but it might also be water security, energy security, defense security. And all of these, of course, we have to do with partners. And so these are the things where we're investing a lot of our energy, hiring new faculty, thinking how can we set up new cooperations. A lot of it requires new types of cooperations because no single professor has the expertise to address these. There's always groups of people, often across institutional boundaries. And then finally, how do we discuss with policymakers how these options then can be implemented? Because we can generate a menu, but politics have to choose from that menu. And we simply want to make sure they know what each dish is about and what the pros and contras of each options are so that they can choose wisely in the name of our society.
Yes, just a specific question. I read online that you're trying to create one legal entity for several institutes, if I'm describing them correctly, which is like, it could be like the Swiss National Lab or the Swiss National Labs. Could you strategically, why is this necessary?
Necessary is a big word. I think it would be beneficial. We have in our family, as I mentioned, 2 universities. They're both fairly large, and we have 4 research institutes. The research institutes are all smaller than the universities, and they're actually quite heterogeneous in size. The smallest ones, WSL, ERVAG, are about the size of a department at ETH. So there's 1 or 2% size of, about 2 to 3% of the total budget. The research institutes do a fantastic job within their remit, within their mandate. ERVAG is the Water Research Institute of the Federation, and they're one of the world's top water research institutes. The challenge we have is that these institutes have all been created with particular missions that they address, and they were generated when society realized, Houston, we have a problem. So ERVAG started out as a consulting arm of ETH in the early 20th century when Switzerland realized, oh my God, our lakes are polluted, our rivers are polluted, we got to do something. We are now faced again today with a whole bunch of challenges, climate change, energy transition, and so forth. And I'm simply convinced we cannot afford to make a new research institute every time we have a challenge, because before we know it, we'll have 20 of these. So rather what I think is that we need to have a mechanism where we're much better able to pick up new challenges and generate the know-how that we need, the expertise we need to be able again to consult with government or generate options for policymakers to generate. Now, let's take the digital transformation, cybersecurity. If you ask ERVAG, what have you done to address the societal challenge of cybersecurity? They're going to say, well, Michael, I'm a water research institute. I'm not in charge of cybersecurity. Well, it turns out nobody's in charge of cybersecurity because it was not a challenge 50 years ago. So either we have a system where the current institutions pick up these new challenges and they realize we have to expand our remit, or we generate a new roof and we simply say, guys, together from now on, if there's a concrete challenge, you're in charge. Just like ETH is in charge. ETH is able, or EPFL, is able to generate new know-how. ETH makes a new department when they see a new challenge. The Department of Health Science and Technologies, when they realized engineering needs to come much closer to science, both schools did that. At the EPFL, they have this NeuroX, where they put neurobiology, engineering, life sciences together, and computer science together in one institute, because they realized we need to bring these things together. And so I'd like in the research institute domain to same thing happen. Concrete, applied know-how be generated proactively, not only once the problem is already there, but when we see it coming, because often we see it coming ahead of time. There are different ways in which you can implement that. One would be to make one large institute out of the current one, and then simply say from now on you're required for everything. Or you have a system where these institutions together agree to expand their competencies as the needs of society develop. We're currently discussing with them and have a consultation. We're open as long as this goal is achieved. I'm fairly flexible regarding how we achieve it. At the end, the solution is what's important, not how you implement it.
Thank you for explaining that. It seems to me, and from the outside, it's very complex, the work that you do today. It's like many puzzle pieces that somehow need to fit with one another. And I'm curious, my work also focuses on mindset. What's the success mindset you think you need to have in the back of your mind when you're juggling so many moving pieces?
You address an interesting point. So in academia, the big challenge is the huge amount of freedom that we have as institutions, as individuals, as subgroups. And so the question is, how do you make sure that an idea finds enough volunteers in a certain sense, people who believe in it or willing to go along with it, so that it will actually happen? If you're a leader, you need to be ahead of the group. You need to lead. Some people have the tendency to be so far ahead of the group that they're not ahead of the group anymore. They're just alone. And so what I've learned is that one has to be patient. And then you have to have mechanisms to encourage people to share your vision. There's many ways to do that, and they all add up to each other. Allowing other people to take ownership. Often, again, the good idea is not your idea, it's somebody else's idea. You're just enabling it. Good arguments are fantastic in academia. We're trained to fight with arguments. So if you have good arguments, the other guy might not necessarily like what you propose, but he understands it and says, well, all right, and grumble, but okay. Often a little bit of financial support goes a long way also in the academic settings. And then if you discuss with colleagues outside of academia, you need a different toolbox. In politics, arguments only get you so far. Their commonality of interests is more important. What do you care about? What do you want to accomplish? Where do we see overlap? Right? So the saying goes, in academia, at the end, the truth wins. And in politics, in the end, the majority wins. They're both valid mechanisms to come to a decision, but they're just different types of decision-making processes. And so some of the frustrations I often see with my colleague scientists in political process is their failure to comprehend that politicians work differently. But I explained it to them. How can they not see it? And it's just, they have seen it, but they have different mechanisms to come to decisions than we do. So it makes the job not easy, but very stimulating.
And I also research persuasion and trying to understand it from different angles. And I'm curious to ask you and to understand from your point of view, what is your definition of persuasion?
It's persuasion. Persuasion is maybe getting somebody. Winston Churchill once said, it's the skill of sending someone to hell and make them look forward to the trip. It's basically get somebody excited about something that you would like them to be excited about so that they will do it. Your idea or your plan becomes their plan, your project becomes their project. I think that's what persuasion is about, is getting people to join the team.
And in terms of your current work, do you see persuasion as having a major role?
It's the only way forward in the role I have. And again, how you can reach persuasion works differently depending on which discussion partner you have. Are you talking to somebody who works for you, somebody who works with you, somebody you work for, somebody who's simply peripherally attached to your sphere of influence? All of these different constellations require different approaches to persuade these people. Openness to also be persuaded. Often, again, the better idea is in the other people's head. Being willing to be flexible, to adjust your goals so that, again, you get common goals. It's rarely that the final solution is what you had initially in head. Often, particularly in Switzerland, compromise is going to be what you're going to end up with. My definition of compromise is something nobody's happy with, but everybody can live with. But if it's a step in the right direction, take it, celebrate it. And Rome was not built in one day.
And in terms of the craft of teaching, when you were teaching, what do you think the role of persuasion was there?
I'm not sure. Again, I would more get them excited, get them interested. I'm not sure you need to persuade them. So if you teaching is simply making sure people learn. I don't need to persuade them of anything. I need to encourage them to learn. No, I don't think persuasion is a key tool in teaching. It would be weird. And, if I was an ideologist, perhaps I would like to persuade them that my theory is correct. But again, teaching is something completely different.
Before I ask my last question, is there any burning topic you'd like to address?
We haven't talked about the challenges for young people in today's world, which is changing so fast. It's a challenge for us universities to know, how do we teach? What do we teach? Again, the best recommendation I have is keep learning, keep being flexible, agile, never rest, keep being curious. and that probably is your best bet long term. But we are living in a times that is less comfortable, I guess, than when I was a young man. And so I have quite a few kids. I have 6 kids, and so um, making my best to encourage them to follow their dreams, but at the same time, stay optimistic. So I've become a big fan of the ancient Stoics, right? So the Stoics had basically the philosophy: take everything that happens in life and put it into one of two baskets: the very large basket of the things you cannot influence, and the small baskets of the things that you can influence. Take that big basket, put it away. You can't influence it. Stop worrying about it. Focus your energy on the small basket of things you can influence and do something about it. Make the world a better place by focusing on what you can influence. And that gives me a lot of positive energy and allows me to become a little bit more, how I say this, calm, a bit more serene about all the terrible things that currently happen, but where I have no influence over.
And then my final question for those wanting to follow in your footsteps because they were inspired by our conversation today, what is your advice to them?
Don't try to follow my footsteps. Find your own path.
Thank you very much for taking time from your busy schedule. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you very much, Sharina. All the best.
And that concludes our conversation for today. If you enjoyed this discussion, please be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with others who might benefit from it. Until next time, be well.